The other day, I came across this Scientific American website talked about the connecting with the internet, a pioneer 40 years later. This item was actually written in 2009, so it's 24 years old. All right. And it talked about the first connection of the internet was connecting four computers uh, in the west coast of the United States. Because of that, I remembered I wanted a history that I'd previously read about the history of the internet in Australia. And there's an organisation in Australia called AARNet, which still exists. And in AARNet, if I can find it, all right, um, there we are. History of AARNet. They started it back in 1989 with the internet, all right. They still exist. AARNet are the internet service providers to the universities and this, I think the CSIRO. I'm not sure about the CSIRO, but in doing their thing, they actually wrote a book, and that's some of the history of the internet and when they did it. And so it's actually got a book, and you can actually get the book online. See if I can find the bit that I'm looking for. All right, this bit here. Okay. And part of this book has two interesting aspects of it. One has to do with the raising of money for AARNet and the raising of money to get going on the internet. It says, I'll read this bit out. Raising the money. While the international links were developing in Houston, and Houston was working on the technical side of the network, McKinnon was leading a push to put together sufficient funding for the proposal. The AVCC, which is some sort of university thing, also tried to get Telstra, then known as Telecom, involved in sponsoring the project. But like their forebears in the US, had found that with AT&T, there was little interest in the new concept from the phone company monopoly. Jeff Houston comments, Telstra could have owned it from day one. We were struggling to get money to do it. I'll explain what he means when he says Telstra could have owned it from day one. Greg Batchelor remembers visiting Telstra's head office in Melbourne to try to convince them to become involved. We were trying to ensure that the funding for the network in the early days. I had a meeting with senior management at Telstra. I remember sitting on the 45th floor of the Telstra headquarters in Exhibition Street in Melbourne saying, you guys should be part of this. It's going to be the communications of the future. The person I was talking to said that they didn't think network communication was ever going to take off. Telstra's main focus was voice. They didn't think that data communication would take over from voice. I said, I think you're wrong. You're going to eat your words. In actual fact, they did end up eating their words. Telstra gets more revenue today from data than they do from voice. So Telstra eventually, because AARNet couldn't manage all the private side of the internet, they actually handed over, I think for a cost of $1 or something ridiculous like that, the whole of the internet to Telstra. So Telstra got it for free, but they could have been involved right from back from the beginning. They didn't pay any money. Another interesting aspect about this is also how people didn't know what was going on then, and something else had happened. So I'll see if I can find this article, part of the same article, where it's not there. It's not there. Perhaps that's a bit there. No. Okay, that's not it. I'll see if I can get to it. It's probably this bit here. Yeah. All right. There's this bit here. Um, they were talking about this comes from the previous page. AARNet in Australia was being watched closely by Boeing Computer Services, BCS, a subsidiary of the giant US aerospace company based in Washington State. This is Boeing, the same Boeing that makes all the big Boeing aircraft. Originally formed from the different computing organizations within Boeing, BCS, which is Boeing Computer Services, uh, de- um, developed, was developed as an independent subsidiary. It serviced external clients and had installed the National Telecommunications Network for NASA in the US. Right, this is back in 1990. In May 1990, just as AARNet was being connected, that's AARNet in Australia, McKinnon received a visit from 5 senior executives from Boeing Computer Services. He recalls most of the interesting encounter. They had gone to the Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, and said they would take over this expensive thing called AARNet to help the government out. This is Boeing, so they're going to help the government out. 5 of them came down to Wollongong to say that the government had agreed they should take it over. What date would suit? This is them asking, and Boeing. I raised an eyebrow and asked if I could see the documentation. No documentation, they said, but I could ring such and such at the Prime Minister's department if I needed reassurance. I mentioned that the universities were independent from government. They responded, yes, but they are funded by the public purse. I responded by saying, so what? They simply could not understand that universities were independent from government and not swayed by that sort of naked pressure. I did give them a good lunch and kept talking jovially while they continued trying to apply pretty unvarnished pressure. Eventually they departed, advising they would be back when things were clearer. I never heard any more. So the point being there is if something hadn't have been, if that person was easily swayed by these American 5 business people from Boeing, the whole of the internet would have been owned by Boeing in Australia. So that's just some of the history of the internet in Australia and the 2 particular incidents that happened that particular way. It's interesting that even today, even more modern times, we now have a situation where we have in later years, this particular person saying that Australia did not need high-speed internet. Doesn't
What
actually
I
say it
said
here.
in the lead up to the election was that our goal was to ensure that everybody had access to at least 25 megs by 2016, end of 2016. This assumed, of course, that the fixed wireless and satellite performed as promised. We didn't have a lot of transparency on that. In the strategic review, the NBN CO's best estimate, people might say it's a conservative estimate, is that they will not be able to achieve that by 2016. But they will, nonetheless, by 2019, which is the second part of our goal, ensure that over 90% of the fixed line footprint has 50 megs or better. So it's really just a question of practicality, and.
So that's what Malcolm Turnbull was saying in 2016 or something like that. Just to give you some sort of appreciation of what this is all about, there was if I can find it, I need to go back to there. An article written, if I can find my page, yeah. There was a YouTube video which is called about the myths re the NBN, which was done before the NBN was starting to roll out by a technical person at the NBN saying these are all the myths about the NBN and what should be done. And one of the myths was that that the fibre to the node would be adequate. And the guy said he didn't like the word adequate. As an engineer, adequate's not a proper way of doing things. But some of the things he said at the end of his talk, which were, most people don't need high-speed broadband in relation to that. There's some statements that other people made during the years. Number one, there is no need for any individual to have a computer in their home. Ken Olsen, president of Digital Equipment Corporation in 1977, saying there's no need for people to have a computer in their home. Point number two, no one will ever need more than 637 kilobytes of memory for a personal computer. 640K ought to be enough for anybody. That's Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, and he said that in 1981. Another statement, I think there will be a world market for about maybe 5 computers. Thomas Watson, president of IBM in 1943. A world of 5 computers. Point number 4, Well-informed people know it is impossible to transmit voice over wires, and were it possible to do so, the thing would be of no practical value. That's an article in the Boston Post in 1865. And lastly, the Americans have a need for the telephone, but we do not. We have plenty of messenger boys. Sir William Pierce, Chief Engineer of the British Post Office in 1878. Interesting, is an engineer. So there's a whole lot of information. If you don't believe any politician tells you anything about the internet, don't believe any politician that says anything technical. Okay, that was just my bit of a take on a bit of the history of the internet in Australia and how some things came about. If you want to know more, email me. Thank you.